Client. Hi, I'm Christine Rostdeutsch,
And I'm Barbara Menino.
and today on Soapbox Wisdom, no, we're not talking about dream clients. We're talking about difficult clients, difficult customers. This is a topic that I don't think any of us really want to have to deal with. But Barbara and I thought that it's better to prepare, think about it beforehand, before something comes up, before you're in a situation with a difficult client. And when we're talking difficult clients and customers, we're talking whatever industry you're in, and is it a coaching client, consulting client? Like Barbara and I do work for people, so like as a freelancer client, it really is. This what we're talking about today is really for any area that you're dealing with customers. So Barbara, I thought we would start with just talking about what are we talking about? What might a difficult client look like?
So there are many manifestations, and we can get the impression when we're on an early call and talking that a client is going to be demanding, and the expectation is that client wants so much of our time, much more than is in the contract or will be in the contract, and much more than it's feasible for us to give. Um, Sometimes we face clients where there's a lack of boundaries, uh, or there's also the client who's nickel and diming every bit of the fee at the front end. These can all be red flags, and that's why a thorough assessment at the front end is imperative. But let me be clear, it's not always or just about the other. There may be something in us
Mhm.
that client may not too. It not be a good fit of personality, or maybe the type of alignment isn't right. So it can be any of a host of reasons. It always takes two, but the important thing is to suss that out on the front end so you don't get stuck in the mud as the engagement continues.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Barbara, about, you know, it could go either way. We're not saying that, oh, we're perfect or you're
Oh,
perfect,
for
and it's
sure.
always the other person's fault that something's not going right. This is, we're talking about communication here. We're talking about relationships with other humans. And it just, all of this goes both ways. So it's think about.
Personalities too, right?
Yeah, and personalities, right. And I think we have to remember too, no matter where you are in business, early stage, mid stage, what, making good money, not making good money, that, oh, just getting another client, maybe because you're going to be making money isn't enough of a reason to say yes to working with somebody. If you're getting that feeling that might not be the best situation.
Yeah, it could be work styles too. People get to the end of a project in different ways. It could be that, and that's such a good point, Christine, that you just mentioned. Um, Eliminating that kind of panic urgency. This is another paying client. I have to overcome this. I have to take this engagement and take this client on. There has to be some self discipline and understanding what we think will work and what won't.
Mhm. And also I want to add in, we talk about, both from our viewpoint, and the client's viewpoint, but also what about when we're the client? We have to remember also we're working with other people and we're the client, And we have to, keep that top of mind of, you know, are are we easy to work with? Are we reasonable? Or are we starting to be demanding for somebody that we're engaging in a service or buying a product from, or whatever it may be? So this is this, like I say, this topic is so much larger than just, oh, I'm the service provider and there's the client. This comes up in so many facets of life, I think.
Yeah, um, it truly does, and it is a topic that's rife for discussion. This is a very good point, um, of being in the other side of this, not being the service provider, but the client. And sometimes any of us can come to a project with such an intense need, wanting something to work so well. And sometimes when one over tries or wants it so badly, that can create problems too. So it's important to kind of check our own behavior and make sure our emotions are intact and that we're making good decisions, that we're not demanding too much of other people, so that it can be a reasonable, balanced, mutual engagement. Those are the engagements that end up with successful outcomes.
Right. And we need to be looking at things along the way, not just waiting for something to come up. And you don't stick your head in the sand just because things are going okay. You think they're going okay, but does the client think things are going okay? Or is something going on their end you're not aware of? And then all of a sudden, one day they show up and it's like, oh, things aren't working out. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? I thought everything was fine. So, assessing along the way, really communicating, again, really communicating to make sure, hey, is everything going well here? Is there anything that needs changing? What do you think about that, Barbara?
I so agree with that. That's like in corporate life. There's a lot of theory now, that instead of just waiting to do an employee assessment every 6 months, maybe once a year, there should be these mini assessments along the way. So if things are off course, um, they can they can be nipped in the bud. And the other side of that is not being afraid of honest feedback,
Mm.
as long as that feedback is delivered with care and commitment. I think sometimes there might be a tendency, if we're a service provider, to want to do so well that we would be afraid to hear anything negative. But constructive criticism is one way that we learn. So we have to be open to that. Similarly, a client, or when we're a client, we have to be open to that as well. Again, that's another strategy to end up with a successful outcome.
Yeah. It, we're coming around to, my one of my new favorite subjects is, like, it's getting into your emotions, and being able to deal in situations, I didn't see this conversation going this way. But I wanted to bring up the issue of also, self-confidence again. And I think, as I said in the beginning of this episode, of think about these situations before they happened, because if you wait till it's in your face, it's like, and then your self-confidence might plummet, and you might not be able to think clearly and deal with the situation effectively, and get a good outcome for both of you. um, but the self-confidence, I think, comes in a lot with, setting boundaries, being confident enough that it's okay. It's okay
Put
to
the stop
say,
sign up.
hey, come 5 o'clock, my time, I turn the computer off and I'm done for work. Don't try to get a hold of me. Uh, and sticking to it. And I think early on in business, especially the self confidence is probably a big issue for many people. But as we go through these things, it's like, all right, here we go again. We're good.
You,
uh,
I read an interesting article yesterday to tag into what you're saying, or to tap into what you're saying about emotion. And the article was about failure. And there are two things that are wrong when one thinks about or considers failure. Number one, there is a tendency to absorb the failure and uh, deem it representative of your total lack of value. And it isn't that at all. It is one mistake or one misstep or one engagement that just didn't turn out right. It doesn't mean that you're incompetent. It doesn't mean that you can't go forward and do good work. The other thing that was interesting about failure, and I've actually never heard it described this way, um, is that with all the talk about failure these days, there's there's a tendency to glorify failure as this
mm,
tremendously wonderful thing. And this woman, who actually is a psychotherapist and was really speaking to fellow psychotherapists, this woman was saying it's not to be glorified. It's not bring out the drums and have a parade
mhm,
because you learn from failure. Her point was that you learn from failure because failure is information,
mhm.
it is a data point, and it is another way of evaluation and assessment to say, this didn't work. And then to ask the question why, and to analyze so you know what not to do and what else to try the next time. I
Right.
thought that was a rather refreshing point of view for this day and age, because to some extent, failure has been glorified. And I don't think anyone should be ashamed of failure by any means. But this psychologist was suggesting that we put it in the right perspective. Something to think about as well.
Right. Well, that's a great point you made there, Barbara. Um, yeah, glorifying failure seems crazy, but it's a learning point. Like you say, it's a data point. We learn from our mistakes. How else do you make adjustments if you don't make a mistake? And I think just you do things often enough, you learn to get over it quickly, and move on. And when you're talking about a client relationship, hopefully both of you can be adults in the situation, and get over it quickly. But it can be particularly difficult that maybe you try to work something out. You try to diffuse whatever issue might be going on, and kind of maybe your blood pressure is going up because you're just doing everything possible to make it work and it's just not happening. And I think there does come a time, unfortunately, that maybe you have to fire a client, terminate the relationship. Now, it all depends on contracts, of course. I understand that. Um, but I don't think jeopardizing your health is worth working with extremely difficult people.
It is not, and that's another point of courage, just what we talked about before. Having the self-discipline to realize that maybe this isn't a match made in heaven. it's also good to know, even if you're engaged in it, that if you have to terminate, you do. And a reminder that your contracts should have a clause that addresses termination, even early termination of the contract. There's nothing shameful if you're in a situation of, what was that movie long ago with Drew Barrymore when she was a kid? Irreconcilable Differences, where you just couldn't get a situation to work. So much of this is being realistic. So much of this is having confidence, just as you said. So much of it is learning, and you never stop learning, which is another thing.
Mhm.
You always can recognize there's room for improvement. That's part of the joy of being in business or even working in corporate life. As I quoted on another podcast, you really have the opportunity to learn something new every day. And that's kind of a cool thing.
Right. And absolutely. And besides jeopardizing your health, you have to ask yourself, is how you're reacting affecting your work with other clients? You know.
Excellent point.
Um,
Because one bad thing preys on you, and it can mess up everything else. I did want to comment when you talked about affecting health. That's the other thing. Being aware of that happening, that feeling that your head is going to explode, that knot in the pit of your stomach, maybe getting shaky or sweaty palms. Any of those things are signals that maybe a bad situation is going too far. And you really have to check it and take control of it.
mhm. Right. And like I said, with this whole discussion today, we're suggesting, it's like, think about this. How would you respond? I'm not going to say I was going to say react, but it's more, how would you respond in a difficult situation with a client, and addressing it, up here in your head before something even comes up. uh, you'll just be better off if and when it does happen. um, so
So the moral of the story then would be, address it beforehand, be proactive, know the signs, even in yourself, address it during the engagement, and have the self control to say no on the front end, it isn't going to work, or no as you proceed, because there are reconcilable differences. Be confident and committed, know it's a learning curve, and move on.
yeah. Well, and Barbara and I wanted to share again that we are looking to start a book club, and we wanted to start with John Maxwell's How Successful People Think. It's a wonderful little book. I love it because it's good for you whether you're in business or not. You know, thinking, to me, that's one of those topics of, more people could do it better. I think. And we're just looking for anyone who might be interested. So we do have a sign up form at a bit.ly /soapbox wisdom book club. It's not making a commitment of you have to join our book club. We'll be in touch with you to find out what are your good days and times, and see if things would work out. Like I say, the book we want to start with is How Successful People Think.
It's a really good book. What I Christine is the one who turned me on to it. What I love about it is a quick read, but it's the type of book that you go back to rethink, continually to think more about what you've learned. And it has individual chapters that are so divided. If there's one kind of thinking or thought process that you think you need to work on, you can go right to that chapter.
Mhm.
So that's why we're starting there.
Right. So Like I say, you can go to bit.ly/Soapbox Wisdom Book Club and just put your information in there and we'll be in touch.
So, Christine, I've enjoyed this discussion. Another topic that I would bet preys on a lot of our listeners' minds. And we'd always love to hear if you have any comments you'd like to share with us. But for now, we're finishing this episode of Soapbox Wisdom. We look forward to seeing you again.
Soapbox Wisdom is hosted by brand messaging and storytelling consultant Barbara Menino and business and mindset coach Christine Rothdeutsch. You can find them online at barbaramenino.com and christinerothdeutsch.com.